It's why the support of institutions devoted to understanding and studying the American past are so vital, because the American past is the only case study, it's the only diagnostic guide we have to figure out how to treat recurring conditions.
It is my personal pleasure to introduce a fellow historian that I've known for years, Jon Meacham. Andrew Jackson brought us together, and I ended up liking Jon way better than Andrew Jackson. Jon Meacham is a Pulitzer Prize-winning presidential historian, contributing writer to the New York Times Book Review, and contributing editor at Time. Jon's book, The Soul of America, The Battle for Our Better Angels, is a timely look at tumultuous periods in American history when presidents and ordinary citizens came together to defeat the forces of fear and hate. By exploring past dark moments in American history, Jon Meacham shows us how our better angels have again and again won the day. And there's a cornucopia of Jon's other books to mention as well. But let me just say how thrilled we are that you are here to discuss whatever is on your mind tonight, Jon. And I just met Emily Rooney tonight. She doesn't know me, but I know her because I tune in every Friday on GBH for Beat the Press. Emily is also the creator and former host of Greater Boston. We are so grateful to have her expertise as a journalist tonight in conversation with Jon Meacham. Following our Bully Boy theme, clearly we are being treated to top-shelf talent all around. So let the conversation of the year begin.
Thanks for that introduction, Catherine, and a big virtual welcome to all of you joining tonight for the Massachusetts Historical Society's annual gala. It's also weird, but it works. This event, like many other virtual events, has had to adjust to a few bumps along the road. So, to be clear, my conversation tonight with historian Jon Meacham is on tape, not live. So we hope nothing is out of date, but if it is, you know why. Welcome, Jon.
Thank you. All history is somewhat out of date, so it's perfectly fine.
That's true. You know, I got such a big kick out of reading both of your most recent books, and one of the reasons why is because I really love reading historical dialogue, I mean, real historical dialogue. So I picked a few that I want to start with tonight. The first one is when General Robert E. Lee went to surrender to Ulysses S. Grant. They originally, they had a little small talk, and it took a couple days for them to get together, and it was clearly an awkward situation. But then Lee said to Grant, "I asked to see you to ascertain upon what terms you would receive the surrender of my army." Now, honestly, could you put that into perspective to what's going on today?
Well, nobody's surrendering. That's certainly true. You know, in many ways, modern America began at Fort Sumter and at Appomattox. They're sequential chapters in the same story. We live, even now, shaped by the forces that were present from 1619 unto this hour. We've always struggled over identity, over culture, over power, over liberty. Our darkest forces of racism and nativism and xenophobia and extremism, isolationism, have been the things that have given form and substance to our national life. And in many ways, our history is shaped, our present is shaped by the extent to which we can make those darker forces ebb as opposed to flow.
Within the last couple of days, though, we heard Mike Pompeo saying that we're going to transition to a second term for President Trump. And was he joking, or how are we supposed to perceive that? And how should the media be covering that kind of commentary?
I don't know whether Secretary Pompeo was joking or not. If he was, he shouldn't have been. The peaceful transfer of power since 1800, 1801 has been a hallmark of this democracy. There is no substantial evidence no evidence, really. I won't even dignify it with substantial, to somehow question the result that has unfolded in the election week, which, as most of our friends here know, that's the way elections were for a long time. It took a while to get the ballots counted. And when you think about it, We live in such a big, complicated, disputatious country that it's not surprising that it takes that long to count that many pieces of data when things are very close. So, I think we're in a place where rhetoric is outrunning reality. And I think that there is a core group of supporters, or at least adherents of the president, who don't want to let go. And I'm confident that the constitutional order and the will of the people will break that grip. And so, to some extent, one of the things we've learned in the last 5 years is that most of these folks have an audience of one, right? Pompeo was speaking, I think, not necessarily to the world or to the country, but to President Trump. And that's one of the many reasons this moment needs to end. Because as what began in Massachusetts continues to unfold, we don't have a monarch. That's one of the reasons we're here, is that it is not an audience of one that should shape us. It's an audience of we the people.
Over the decades, John, as you write in your book, Soul of America, we've seen all kinds of public dissent, civil rights, women's rights, Black Lives Matter, and many more. In your book, you quote the great journalist, CBS journalist, Edward R. Murrow, and he said, "We must not confuse dissent with disloyalty." And that was in 1954. Mm-hmm. Are we doing that now? Is there a problem with what's going on with dissent in America, that we have to bring out, that the president is trying to bring out the military to break up Black Lives Matter protests?
Disagreement's the oxygen of democracy. We're not supposed to agree on everything. If we agreed on everything, we would be an impossibility, which would be an autocracy of opinion. To my mind, the key element going forward is not to worry so much about partisanship per se, but to worry about reflexive partisanship. The notion that no matter what the facts are, no matter what the circumstances are, no matter what the data shows you, you are going to reflexively side with the team you're on. There's nothing wrong with, and in fact, a noble tradition of being reflectively partisan, of having a series of principles that you find to be orienting for you, and you judge reality through that prism. That's fine. But I promise you, 10% of the time, or some number, the other side is going to be right. And the best parts of America have come when, on those occasions, people have said, maybe they have a point. And I think we need to get to a place where we can say again, maybe they have a point.
But loyalty is one of the biggest issues for our current president. So he is saying, if you're not with me, you're disloyal.
Right, and that's one of the reasons he lost.
You think?
I do. I think that, yes. I mean, but look, my views on Donald Trump are no secret.
Yeah, I know.
And haven't been for years. But he tried to do something in America that is fundamentally un-American, which is running a cult of personality that was allied with the power of the state. And enough Americans said no. Now we just need to press on.
Donald Trump did very well, as you know, with Latinos and Black African Americans. And he has also said that he has done more for Black Americans than any president since Abraham Lincoln. Is there any truth to that?
I don't think so. And one of my favorite things is he calls him the late, great Abraham Lincoln, which I don't know why that amuses me, but I love it. I don't think so. The thing about democracy, though, is you can't be for it when it works out your way and against it when it doesn't. And so whatever percentage of Black people voted for Donald Trump, or white people, or Latinx people, or women, or men, or whatever, that's their privilege. That's the sacred right that we have fought so much to secure. And so exercising it in good conscience is what people do. And I'm very hesitant, have been for a long time, about talking about the Black vote or the rural vote. Votes are highly individualistic. And even though there may be a predominance of one or the other. I think the only way to know why somebody voted for a given candidate is to go ask them.
You were actually extremely optimistic in a lot of your writings, and you talk about how from Abraham Lincoln and many other presidents, they say, you write about how the better angels will win, that the soul of America comes forward, that the good will win out. Is that always the case?
No, and what I do say, with all respect, I say that they can and they have, but that doesn't mean they will. The way you characterize it there suggests that there is an innate, automatic mechanism in history that everything works out. Everything about history tells us that most things don't work out. And it's a damn miracle that as much has. And so my view of the country is the same as my view of human nature, which is not original. The authors of Genesis had it. John Calvin had it. Reinhold Niebuhr had it. This is in no way original. But I do believe that there is a soul to the country. It's an arena of contention in which our better angels do battle against our worst instincts. And if those better angels can win 51% of the time, that's a heck of a good day. And the reason I do what I do for a living is I find biography and history so fascinating, not because people have done so many great things in the past, but because people have managed to do any great things in the past. They have transcended their limitations. They have transcended their fundamentally sinful natures in order to push us toward a more perfect union that continues to create a country, in Lincoln's phrase, that's worth fighting for. There's nothing inevitable about the American experiment's ultimate success at all. It's why citizenship is so important. It's why events like this are so important. It's why the support of institutions devoted to understanding and studying the American past are so vital, because the American past is the only case study. It's the only diagnostic guide we have to figure out how to treat recurring conditions.
One of the things you say about the past is there's this tendency, and we all do it, with a lot of things in life, but there's a tendency to look back at the past and at history and say things were better then, or it was done well then. The end of World War II. I mean, there was a classic denouement, but it's not really true, is it? I mean, if you really delved into that, or as you wrote about, sometimes it was a disaster, as we may feel we're living in now.
Absolutely. I mean, I get this asked this all the time, as I'm sure you do. Why can't it be like it used to be? Well, tell me when that is. If it was before 1965 or so, I've never had a black person ask me that. If it was 1919, you wouldn't ask me that, because you would have been disenfranchised. You couldn't vote until 100 years ago. I've never had a Native American ask me, boy, I wish things could be like they were. Nostalgia is a totally understandable human impulse. So is a kind of narcissism of the present. The idea that our problems are so insuperable that they're unique, as Arthur Schlesinger's phrase, they are uniquely oppressive. Our problems are ours. They must be confronted. But without being in conversation with the past, we unilaterally foreclose the possibility of learning how people in the past dealt with their problems to create any progress at all.
One of the chapters that in your book is called "What the Hell is the Presidency For?" which I got a kick out of. You talk about one time Democratic Alabama Governor George Wallace, who twice ran for the presidency too, and you said that there was something really intriguing that he brought to American politics, and it was it was fear, actually. He said he had a visceral connection to the crowd, and whatever that was, obviously President Trump has it too, others have had it. Why is that so effective?
Fear is one of the great motivators in human experience. Fear, Socrates, I think, defined it as fear being the anxiety, the feeling produced by the anxiety, it was Aristotle, the feeling produced by the prospect of losing something you love. Fascinating definition, right? The feeling produced by the prospect of losing something you love. And so it is incredibly powerful to stand in front of a crowd of people who are worried about tomorrow, to say that person, that group, that immigrant, whatever, is going to take this away from you. Vote for me and I will stand in the breach. And so the politics of fear is something that has been a demagogic weapon since the ancient world. It has been answered successfully from time to time by a politics of hope, by, instead of an anxiety about what one might lose, an anticipation about what one might gain. And that's the fundamental, to me, dialectic of American history.
But as you know, fear sometimes drives decision making. You talk about FDR, and his concession to fear was the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II. Donald Trump's concession to fear was to put a ban on Muslim travel to this country, which a lot of people agreed with. How will that be viewed in history books in the future?
Poorly, in the same way Executive Order 9066, which was the Japanese American. I don't like even like saying that. These were Americans of Japanese descent. Those are, and the Muslim ban, the children at the border, all of that will be a watchword and a warning, God willing, to the future about what not to do. And this goes back to what we were talking about transcendence. Franklin Roosevelt was one of our greatest and noblest leaders, and he was horribly wrong about that. He did not move very rapidly, sometimes, if at all, on civil rights. There are innumerable examples. The best meditation on biography I've ever read is from Frederick Douglass, a speech he gave at the dedication of what's called the Freedmen's Monument in Washington, 1876. Highly recommend everybody go look at it. It takes Lincoln whole. Douglass says, we were not his first concern. We were not his children. We were at best his stepchildren. And yet he liberated a race. And so we must honor him for that. We must judge people on the totality of their lives, and judge not lest ye be judged. So I think that I have a very highbrow biographical theory. It's from the TV show Friday Night Lights about the Texas football team.
Yeah.
I mean this totally. I believe that we should both view each other and the past with clear eyes, but with a full heart.
You know, staying on kind of the fear idea, though, that you make a not so thinly veiled comparison, I'd say, to former Wisconsin Senator Joseph McCarthy and President Donald Trump. You talk about Roy Cohn, who was his attorney at the time, and how he describes Senator McCarthy. He said he's impatient, overly aggressive, overly dramatic, acted on impulse, tended to sensationalize the evidence he had, would neglect to do important homework, and consequently, on occasion, make unsubstantiated challenges and assertions. Yet it was effective for him in many ways, as it has been for our president.
It was for a time, and like McCarthy, it lasted about 4 years. No, seriously.
Yeah.
I remember Roy Cohn, who represented both of them, McCarthy and Trump. Sometimes God just gives you these things. Cohn wrote a book about McCarthy in 1968. And when I came across it, it was like biographical gold, because everything in it was really describing Trump. McCarthy was not a ferocious anti-communist in the beginning. He had been given this issue as a vehicle to power. He understood headlines. He would have loved Twitter. He understood that people see a headline and then the details are less important. But there's something about America that manages to break out of fevers. And by the way, we're going to catch another fever again very soon. I don't know who it's going to be from. It could be from Trump again. It could be from somebody else. But this will happen again and again and again until what Faulkner called the last red and dying evening. Our task as citizens is to stand vigilant and minimize the damage and try to maximize the good.
Well, like I say, you are very optimistic. In the conclusion of your book, Soul of America, you quote Harry S. Truman. You say, the people have often made mistakes, but given time and facts, they will make corrections. How does it work, though, when people aren't being given the facts? And that's what we're going on now. So given the facts, you believe that people will make corrections. But we've never seen anything like this, where we're not being given the facts.
Well, we saw it for a couple of centuries, right? There was, until the progressive era, there wasn't a neutral news media. Every newspaper you got was a partisan spreadsheet. Do you think that the Southern planters of 1855 saw facts in the same way as the abolitionists in Boston? I don't think so. Again, I'm not dismissing or minimizing your question. It's vital, particularly because of technology and the fact that these facts and disinformation can come at us at the same speed and in the same vernacular that we're used to attributing to genuine facts, right? So this is a vital question. But I wouldn't treat it as unique, totally unique. And the way we've overcome these things in the past is we've had leadership that managed to reach an informed, but a dedicated followership, a set of followers who were open to reason as opposed to simply acting on passion. And it's always been a close run thing. Vice President Biden's margin in the presidential election is higher than Harry Truman's, higher than John Kennedy's, higher than Richard Nixon's in 68, about the same as Carter in 76, about the same as Reagan in 80, a little bit lower than Bush in 88, higher than Clinton both times, higher than Bush in 2000, about the same as Bush in 04, a little bit lower than Obama's in 08, about the same as Obama's in 12, and higher than Trump's in 16. So it's fully within the mainstream of where we are. And 51% is a pretty big win in American presidential politics. I wish that weren't the case. I wish this had been a 60-40 election. But even if it had been a 60-40 election, I dare say you would be asking me, how did 40% of the people look at the evidence of the last 4 years and say, yeah, that's what we want?
I'm still asking that.
And we have to ask it. And we also have to ask it with respect and a healthy regard for democratic norms, even if a lot of folks on the other side don't have it, because you cannot become what you behold.
So in your book about John Lewis, The Truth is Marching On, you write about the power of hope. And he talks about how he got a lot of his power of hope from Dr. Martin Luther King. And I'm wondering how, he of course didn't die that long ago, and I know he had a very divisive relationship with President Trump. He didn't go to the inaugural, and Trump said he did a horrible job running his district. But in the face of a pandemic and such a fiercely divided America, how are they instilled with any kind of power of hope?
Because of the life of John Lewis. John Lewis was born on February 21st, 1940, into a segregated society that denied him the fundamental rights of citizenship. Not just the right to vote, but the right to freely mingle, to assemble. It denied him freedom of speech. And until he was 25 years old, he was denied the right to vote. And he died, a revered member of the United States Congress, was eulogized by presidents and mourned by millions. And I mention those details not as a sign of temporal honor, but to demonstrate what his sense of hope did. He believed fundamentally that America had the capacity to amend itself and adjust itself. And he lived it. And he would say, he said it to me a lot, when people say America hasn't changed, I say, come walk in my shoes. And so that's not hope from Brigadoon. That's hope from observable, discernible, historical experience.
How did he reconcile the idea of nonviolent protest? I mean, Martin Luther King was actually the one who promoted that, but we've seen so much violent protest, not just in this country, but all over the world. And he still yet believed that that was the only way to affect change.
Always, always. Part of it was a practical issue. And he and Diane Nash and others told me that they didn't have an option. Black Americans in the South in the 1950s, if they had taken up arms, who do you think would have won? Nonviolence was a tactic. It was also a philosophy. It was the gospel in action. It was the commandment in Leviticus to love your neighbor as yourself, finding manifestation in the streets and the courthouses of America. He never abandoned it. He never really questioned it that much. He questioned how long it would take, but John Lewis never thought, I need to go buy an AR-15 and see what I can do. He just didn't believe that. His philosophy was grounded in the gospel, and his tactics were grounded in Gandhi. And the intersection of those two tributaries are what helped redeem the country insofar as we have been redeemed, and there's so much work yet to be done.
I'm curious what he would have thought and what you think the soul of America will be under a Biden administration as opposed to what it has been for the past 4 years.
It's an arena of contention, right? No single election, no single piece of legislation is ever going to bring about redemption in the kingdom of God. That's beyond human capacity. Even the beloved community, Dr. King and John's phrase for this. What I think President-elect Biden represents, and I've said this a lot, I said this at the Democratic National Convention, is it does represent a chance for us to give empathy and curiosity and a respect for reason a better chance to actually take a stand in the arena against the forces of fear and selfishness and greed. Do I think that empathy, grace, and curiosity and reason are going to win every day? No, because I'm a historian. The folks who are watching know history. And you know that we lose more than we win. The point is, how can we win as many as we can?
And what will be the first thing you think that President Biden will do to try to unify the country from the soul? I mean, it's one thing to put a fast track on a vaccine and to bring people together over other issues, but with this soul that you talk about, what will it be?
I think he will. He will speak as he has spoken for so long, and argue that what holds us together is ultimately more important than what drives us apart. And he does. I think the pandemic, I wouldn't dismiss the pandemic or minimize the pandemic as a capacity for a genuine case study on whether this can work. Because for us to control the pandemic, as I'm not a doctor, so I don't, but from what I understand, it's going to require us, I haven't got one in front of me, I'm in my garage, it's going to require us to wear a mask. And if you wear a mask, it's not about protecting you, it's about protecting the other person. That is an act of patriotism and grace and charity. It requires a certain adherence to the advice of expertise. It requires a level of sacrifice, a level of ceding a certain amount of individual autonomy for the common good. So he's got a real-time issue that's going to require not simply an intellectual and physical step, but that intellectual and physical step are going to be driven by whether in our souls we care enough about each other to take steps to protect each other. So we'll know pretty soon.
You think he can do it?
I do.
So, John, when we were supposed to have this gala in person back in the spring, and at the time, the Mass Historical Society reached out to its members and donors and board members and people just to come up with some questions for you. And we did get one that I'm going to put to you, and it's from Fred Ballou from Sudbury, who's a very active member of the society. He said, his question is, what did you think of the 1619 project? And by that, he is, of course, referring to the very ambitious piece of work produced by the New York Times a couple months ago.
I think it's fascinating. I think it's a valuable contribution to the historical and cultural understanding of the country. I don't think it's the last word on American history. I don't think there will be a last word on American history. I'm skeptical of the phrase definitive biography as a general rule. I wish that we could find a way to have more of a conversation about the arguments of the 1619 Project and the more traditional views about 1776 and 1787 and 1789 in a conversation that would be more illuminating than heated, because I think all these moments inform each other. And so I think I'm delighted that it is in the conversation. I wish we didn't live, this goes back to what we were talking about, in some sort of tribal historical world. I don't think you have to pick 1619 or 1776. I think they are inherently connected to each other, as is 1965, as is 2020. So history is a continuum. It is, as a great Dutch historian once said, it is an argument without end. And I would hope our arguments could generate more light than heat. Well,
as you know, the New York Times did dial back their original statement a little bit. It wasn't quite as definitive, but with an editor's note, they sort of changed that. But were you troubled at all, or were you kind of enthusiastic about some of the discussions over the historical inaccuracies? Not a ton of them, but a couple that became kind of a debate.
What do historical societies, what do universities exist for but to
nitpick.
Argue? Well, not nitpick. No, I don't mean that. Look, Lord knows how many hyperbolic statements I've made or problematic things. I mean, this is just the nature of academic and journalistic and popular historical debate. And what's the point of this? The point is to engage ideas. When I say these kinds of conversations, the point is that human experience has taught us that conversations about the past can often illuminate the present and possibly shape the future. And as Winston Churchill once said, the future's unknowable, but the past should give us hope. And so the fact that people have to correct the record or clarify or amplify, maybe there's a race of superhuman people who are always right. I haven't encountered them, and I'm sure as hell not one of them. I have to clarify and amplify all the time because I'm a human being, and I'm fallen, frail, and fallible. And so is just about everybody I know.
That's true. Well, so John, I understand you've actually used the resources of the Massachusetts Historical Society several times. I don't know. Yeah. I don't have the list of books in front of you. I know they are many and varied. What kind of resources have you used there, and how valuable was it to you?
Hugely important papers, particularly about colonial through Jacksonian America. I've written about Thomas Jefferson, Andrew Jackson. You can't write about Jefferson without dealing with Massachusetts. You can't write about Jackson without dealing with Massachusetts, mainly because Massachusetts, actually, to be fair, Massachusetts hasn't really liked any of my guys. So there is that. But Catherine Algor, who's the great biographer of Dolly Madison, among others, has made immense contributions in her own scholarly life and in her leadership of the Historical Society to make the raw materials of history available to us, by the way, to continue to form and advance and test these arguments. Catherine's work is, I don't know if she would probably want to clarify this a bit, but some of her most important work has been about shedding light on the women who have played such a vital role in the life of the nation, both in public and private spheres. And that requires the diaries, the letters, the raw material, not just of governments, but of societies. And Massachusetts, the Massachusetts Historical Society is a leading light in the informed historical conversation as we try to understand the past and shed light on the future.
Which brings me right back to where I began, which is the wonderful archives they have of real human dialogue. And there's nothing like looking to the past to understand the present with some of those thoughts and words of our forefathers, frankly.
Somebody used to say yesterday's gossip is tomorrow's history, which I totally agree with.
All right. Well, Jon Meacham, thank you so much for joining us tonight. And I know the gala attendees here tonight are so pleased to hear you.
Well, thank you, Emily. And thank you to Catherine. And open your wallets wide for history.
There you go.